Only the apostles stay behind, and everyone else is scattered. To scatter a group of people, we call that a diaspora. The apostle Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, would have related to the idea of, after the Babylonian captivity, not everybody went back to Jerusalem, went back to Judea, went back to what we call the Holy Land. A lot of them stayed in Babylon. A lot of them spread themselves into two groups, a Western diaspora and an Eastern diaspora. In Tarsus, they were more like the Eastern diaspora, but also at the same time, they favored the Hellenistic approach to Judaism, which was somewhat different. In fact, that's what caused the fracas of the Hebraic widows complaining about the distribution of food. And so Stephen was one of the 6 or 7 men who were picked to distribute food and figure out how to make everybody happy. So Saul began to destroy the church, verse 3, going from house to house. He dragged men off and women and put them in prison. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. So the effect of the persecution that arose right after the death of Stephen, led by Saul of Tarsus, the chief prosecutor for Judaism, for the Sanhedrin. He is the guy that's got quite a budget to do this, and he is picking up people, and they're being killed, and they're being found guilty of being heretics, being people who are not Jews, not real Jews, because at this time, the church was very much, it looked like a Jewish church. It looked like a group of people who were from Judaism, but now had embraced the Christ, Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, and that's what made the difference. So there is a place called the Well of Paul at Tarsus, the birthplace where they made silicium, a rough goat hair cloth that was manufactured there. And you can be sure that he knew what that fabric was. And also there was a school of learning, a university at Tarsus. So, when the danger materialized, Paul was arrested on the false charge of defiling the temple. That's verse 27 of chapter 21. I want to, before we get into the big text today, I want us to go back to chapter 21, because something happens. So I'm going to pick it up at verse 37 of 21. Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, the Roman barracks, and he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" And he says, when Paul says, "May I say something to you," he wasn't speaking English. He wasn't speaking Hebrew. He wasn't speaking Aramaic. We get the clue. May I say something to you? And he, the tribune, says, you know Greek. Do you know Greek? Of course. He knew Koine Greek. He was a highly educated man. He studied well. He was astute. He was a great debater. He also would be used as a great defender of the faith of the Lord's church. So, as Paul was being brought into the barracks, the tribune says, just a minute, aren't you the Egyptian? You know, did they have wanted posters around in that day? They are looking for somebody to arrest. Aren't you the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness? Whoa. Paul replied, I'm a Jew from Taursus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people, the rioters, the mob in Jerusalem. And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in Hebrew. He's about to calm them down for a little while because he needs to tell them his story of what happened to him on the road to Damascus. What had gone on prior to that. They knew him. He is the prosecutor. Why is he here in Jerusalem? Because we've been looking to kill him. So, we'll be going into chapter 22 now.
Gordon?
Yes.
It's interesting he doesn't say, I'm from Taursus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city, and oh, by the way, I'm a Roman citizen.
I am a Roman citizen. I've got something in my wallet. I'm an alien. I'm a permanent resident. I am an alien. I come from Scotland, not from Tarsus. I come from Glasgow, no mean city. In Glasgow, Scotland, if you go to perform on the stage as a comedian, it's a compliment for you to be allowed to live if you come from England. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Had it not been for the presence of the Roman troops to restore order, Paul, you know, when did Saul become Paul? You have to go to chapter 13 of the book of Acts and take it in to a little bit of 14. And from then on, it's more Paul and less Saul. Saul is his Hebrew name. Paul is his Greek, Latin, Greco-Roman kind of name. And you know, Paul chooses the path to go west with the gospel. And that's why he does more for the spreading of the gospel than any other apostle or individual in the scriptures. So, after being rescued by the tribune, the Roman commander gave permission, and so he starts this. He's witnessing. He's giving his testimony. You know, all of us who are Christians have a story. We all have something to say about how our lives have been changed since encountering Jesus in the scriptures. Wouldn't it be great to have encountered Jesus on your way to King Soopers? And the people who were with Saul didn't see or hear the voice. Only Saul did. It was just unusual circumstances. here's some information. Paul's trip back to Jerusalem. He's warned by the Ephesian elders, chapter 20, verse 16, about the problems he would encounter, and they begged him not to go. He gets on a ship, comes to Jerusalem. Also in Caesarea, the prophet Agabus. In chapter 11 and verse 28, that same prophet predicts a famine in the world, and it would change things. It would mean that we would be sending relief to the saints in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem started out as the headquarters, ground zero of the church. And one would think the church would flourish because of all those apostles who had stayed behind after the general persecution of Christians by the Apostle Paul. The church will still continue to grow, but it grows because believers are spread out and they go everywhere talking about God, talking about the kingdom, talking about Jesus, talking about people like Peter and the others and what happened in Jerusalem, AD 33 perhaps, the day of Pentecost. So, Paul was received gladly, happily by the brethren in Jerusalem. James and the elders expressed their concerns over accusations circulated by other Jews about Paul, because they said they're stirring up false rumors that you are trying to badmouth the law of Moses, badmouth Judaism. This is interesting. In Acts chapter 9, I just thought of it. We could call that an inspired thought. When he was in Damascus, in chapter 9, this is after he becomes a Christian. He's baptized to wash away all that sin of his. He's still fresh. And somebody like Barnabas will take him on, and he will help the Apostle Paul figure out what was going on. So, in Acts 9, he's in Damascus. How did Saul get out of town in Damascus when other Jews heard that the guy who had become a believer, a follower of Christ, how did they get him out of town? They lowered him down the walls in a basket. At night. You know, that made me think of President Trump getting in a food truck to go on another plane, because who wanted to kill President Trump? The guy's up there in Iran. I'm glad President Trump got home safely, aren't you? They lowered Saul in a basket to get out of town. You know, sometimes we have to come up with some great ideas about protecting those who are important to us. So,
It'd been interesting if Saul actually made it there and tried to arrest Christians, because he never got to demonstrate the validity of those letters, because
Yes.
they were issued in Judea, and Damascus is in Syria.
yes. And we know that after his conversion, he becomes a Christian. He is preaching the gospel in synagogues. Not in Jerusalem, but in Damascus and Syria and other places. So, his Hebrew dialect quiets down the crowd in Jerusalem. Just talking Hebrew. You know, if I were to talk to you in my Glaswegian accent, I don't know if I'd quiet you down. I'd get a lot of questions. What did you mean by that? What did you mean by this? So,
The voice he heard from heaven, Jesus spoke to him in Hebrew.
yes, Jesus speaks to Saul on the road to Damascus in Hebrew. But you know, the thing is, why didn't Jesus save him right there and then? He didn't. He says, go to Damascus, and there you will meet a man who will tell you what you must do. Jesus has already said, I've pegged you, I've tapped you to be my witness, to carry my instrument, to carry my message to the Gentiles. And you know, there must have been a tug and a pull, Warner, between his need to want to, I have to say something to the Jewish people, my people, about the Lord Jesus Christ. And he does effectively prove that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And it doesn't go down too well with a majority of people. Paul will say later on in the Corinthian letter, and so I have become all things to all men, whether they be Jews or whether they be Greeks or Romans, that I might save some. Which is, God wants everybody to be saved, doesn't he? But the fact is, it comes down to you making a choice, a decision. We call it a crisis of faith, a crisis of belief. You come to that crossroad and you have to make a choice. Do I go with Jesus or do I stay with Moses? So, he makes a statement, verses 22 and 23 of the chapter, which we will not get into, about the purpose of God for him, and that is to go to the Gentiles. That verse is what enraged the crowd. And the Roman commander has to rescue him because they are really ticked off. They're angry. So, having received permission, he speaks. Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. This is him making his appeal. And when they heard him speak to them in Hebrew, a hush fell over the crowd. They became even more silent, and then Paul speaks. Recounting the past, he says he studied the law under a guy called Gamaliel. Paul would have been a rabbi, or Saul was known as a rabbi. He was a student of the law. He was an expert in the law. He goes over that in the Philippian letter about all of his qualifications, how he had risen higher than a lot of his contemporaries in the ways of Judaism, knew how to defend it. He was a lawyer. He was a prosecutor. He also says, I persecuted the way. I am the least of the apostles. I am the chief of sinners. Meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus made a difference. So, He persecutes the followers of the way, verses 4 and 5. So here it is. Almost sounds like what he started to say in chapter 21, right at the end. He says, Saul was a real zealot for Judaism, a firebrand and a persecutor. I am a Jew, born in Taursus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. This is my town, Jerusalem. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law. This is very important. The law, not of Moses, but the law, the expression is quite different here. The law of our ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I was like you. I persecuted the followers of this way. Some translations read the way. To their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. The law of our ancestors. Later on, I believe in Acts, I believe it's 28 and verse 3, he doesn't use that phrase. He talks about the law of Moses. So, he continues, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify, they know me. I was their boy. I was their number one guy to put down the church, to put down the way. I even obtained letters from them, from the council, from the Sanhedrin, from their associates in Damascus. I went with letters to say, I have come to arrest all of these people who claim to be followers of the Christ or Jesus. Take them back to Jerusalem for punishment. So, let me ask you this. How does your background of life experiences shape how you approach your practicing your faith today? Does it have anything to do with your background? Surely it must. Don?
Yes.
How?
How does it shape my life?
Yes.
It changed it completely. So from 100, it's a 180-degree change.
And when you first became Christian, did you ever envision that you would become one of the Lord's shepherds here at this church?
No.
And here you are. And we think about, don't you believe, don't you think like I do, that sometimes we are here on this earth sometimes for a specific purpose of God? To witness, to testify, to meet someone, to talk to somebody. And
The Bible tells you that
Yeah.
you're more capable than you think you are.
oh yeah, definitely.
But you have to listen to it.
Yeah. So, digging a little deeper, how has God used those experiences, life experiences, to prepare you for specific opportunities in your ongoing faith journey? Like some people said, I never thought I would be teaching a Bible class. I never thought that I would be a messenger of God, an evangelist, a gospel preacher, a missionary. When I first became a Christian, I was this 15-year-old, just a brand new Christian, and I never thought things moved very quickly for me. The following year, where am I? I'm not in Scotland anymore. I'm in Lubbock, Texas. Not in Jerusalem. Almost. Jerusalem is Abilene. Well, it used to be called that. So anyway, here I am. This is in the late 60s. 16 years being a missionary, 23 years preaching the gospel in one congregation in Kimberling City, Missouri, and then here. We have finished our 20th year, or about to. I never thought I would spend all of this time doing what I am doing, looking back at me at 15 and being baptized. And it changed my life. And this lady right here agreed to change my life too when I asked Judith to marry me. And it was in a kitchen on the floor. And I tipped the little pan that collects all the cold water from the defrosting of the refrigerator, and it ran down my leg. And I was asking Judith first to go to Scotland, and she says to me, "You've asked me to go to Scotland, but is there something else?" "Will you marry me?" And she did. And that's when I hit the pan, and I had lime green trousers on, and the water ran all the way down my leg, and it was very embarrassing. So, questions in Revelation, a reply and a command, but from whom? About noon, Luke is recording this, writing all this down for our benefit. About noon, I was approaching Damascus. Did they have Apple Watches back in those days? No. Did they have a sundial watch? You know, they knew, oh, it's about noon. The sun is what? Highest. So that is how they measured time. It was about noon. As I was approaching Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground. I heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" I asked. "I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting," he replied. My companions, they saw the light. They didn't see the light, if you know what I mean, but they saw that light, but they could not understand the voice. "Oh, Kevin, why don't you go back to Germany?"
About ready to do the third though.
Okay, well, let me finish here. He says, they could not understand what was being said because the message was not for their ears. And that's where we'll leave it. So, I'll see you next week. Oh, just a moment. Timothy.
The ladies, you go all the way to the back corner and go down the hall. And that piece of that exit to the side of that door, go out that door, to the hall, go right going down the hall.
That's mine. Thank you.
I try not to ignore you every time I see you in the parking lot.
Why